If you look at mainstream LGBTQ+ coming-of-age stories from the last decade, you'll notice a very specific formula. The plot is almost entirely driven by trauma, societal bigotry, and the painful process of facing parental rejection. And while those stories hold historical importance, for trans and non-binary audiences, reliving that exact same pain on loop has become exhausting. It creates a predictable cycle where a character's identity is treated as a burden they have to suffer through. This has created a massive vacuum in the market. Readers are actively looking for stories where queer characters are allowed to simply exist inside complex, plot-driven worlds, without their gender identity serving as their main source of anguish. They want the same escapist elements everyone else gets: intricate magic systems, tense palace intrigue, and people swinging giant swords. That brings us to a newly minted webtoon original called Osora. It delivers on all of those high fantasy promises, while shifting the narrative focus away from the typical expectations placed on its queer protagonist. By making these specific narrative cuts, Osora functions as a deliberate subversion of the genre, proving that the identity of the lead doesn't have to be the primary engine for their suffering. The comic actually started as an indie project on Webtoon's Canvas platform, where it built a loyal day-one fanbase around a slow-burn mystery. But when creator Tony Renee decided to reboot the series for a mainstream originals release, they made the choice to restructure the narrative from the ground up. The reboot sacrifices the long, winding backstory that early fans loved in exchange for a tightened, highly condensed pacing structure that gets straight to the point. This shift also brought an immediate visual payoff. The creator leveled up the art rendering, complex perspectives, and detailed world building. By pairing this aggressive structural edit with richer visuals, the comic created a fast-paced vehicle perfectly equipped to tackle its heaviest themes right out of the gate. Right away, we meet the protagonist, Osora. He was assigned female at birth, but comfortably and exclusively uses he/they pronouns. The new version of the comic establishes this fact up front. There is no hiding it to set up a painful, dramatic reveal later in the story. Because of how these stories usually go, audiences naturally expect the main conflict to come from the imposing figure of Osora's father, the king. While the king is established as a deeply flawed and explicitly sexist character, he is also completely accepting of Osora's gender. He acknowledges his son's identity without hesitation or question. By removing the external threat of a bigoted parent, the narrative redirects all the tension inward. Osora forcefully pushes away from any association with being a woman, rejecting that traditional role. But he halts before reaching the traditional roles of a man. Unsure of those expectations, he chooses to settle into a fluid space of his own definition. The central conflict becomes an internal negotiation of the self. The story proves that exploring a character's own internal nuance carries just as much weight as fighting off external societal hatred. You can actually see the success of this approach playing out in real time by treating the Webtoon's comment section as a live focus group. Trans and non-binary readers have flooded their replies, expressing profound relief at finally seeing representation that feels relatable without relying on trauma. There is some minor friction. A small group of Day One readers noted they felt alienated by the sudden loss of the original slow-burn mystery. However, looking at the sheer volume of positive responses, the thematic clarity gained in the reboot far outweighs the loss of that initial pacing. Osora demonstrates that compelling queer stories don't need to rely on the engine of transphobic trauma to create stakes. It relies instead on character agency, intricate, detailed art, and a world where the protagonist is allowed to define themselves on their own terms.